day. We will be interrupting your dinner with our nuggets of wisdom on the subject of 5G and the attendant geopolitics of the debate. How I envision this is we will go through the panel with 5 minutes each for the speakers and then sort of open it up to discussion. I know the subject elicits fairly strong views from folks here, so as well as the panelists themselves. I'm not going to introduce them because their bios are with you and they're folks who have been working on this issue and fairly abreast of what's happening on this front. And I'll start with Trisha, and then we can sort of go around the table, and I hope you have some questions which we can then flag for the panelists. For me personally, I don't see what the debate is. In 1989, when Fujitsu, the Japanese company, tried to acquire Fairchild, which is one of the prominent semiconductor manufacturers in Silicon Valley, the Ronald Reagan administration invoked what was then called the security exception and said that the acquisition of Fairchild, or the attempted acquisition of Fairchild by Fujitsu would not be in the country's interest. Around the same time, the Article 21, the national security exception, was renegotiated into GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, which was already presented in the 1947 variant, which suggested that countries could invoke the national security, or reasons of national security to present obstacles for trade with another country or a group of countries which would otherwise be prohibited under the rules of the WTO. So this seems fairly political to me, but I'm sure the panelists here have a more nuanced view on why 5G is going to be a game changer and why the companies in question have been receiving the kind of flack and attention that they have, and how this opens up questions of surveillance and national security and all the other attendant questions. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Trisha, who will open the proceedings, and then we'll go to Mohan and finally Wang.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sure you already know my name because I've been making all the housekeeping announcements throughout the day. But just to reiterate, I'm Trisha. I'm with the Observer Research Foundation. And I'm going to be focusing my comments strictly on the geopolitical aspect of this debate. When we talk about the geopolitics of 5G, or really any emerging technology these days, the US-China competition is almost forcibly at the forefront. We can't deny that these two powers are important in the 5G space. Of the top 10 chip makers in the world, 6 are American. Huawei alone has more than 45 5G contracts, and it closed a recent one in Russia. News of the US's export controls has seen a veritable deluge of articles talking about whether this is the end of Asia's 5G dreams. I think there are two big casualties when we link strategic competition and 5G. The first is Asian hedging, and the second is the loss of a more nuanced tech agenda in 5G. On hedging, competition between the US and China isn't really very new, but it is increasingly overt and has led to this inextricable entangling of technology, geopolitics, and national security. No longer is the US happy to just leave some of its partners be in the gray area. These partners who hope to maximize the benefits of their relationships with both the US and China. Many of Asia Pacific's middle powers don't subscribe to the view that you have to support one or the other power. And they do not wish to take sides in this strategic competition. They're equally critical of the US and China and have deployed a range of responses along that spectrum. We saw Malaysia come out last week and say outright that they need Huawei's technology because they do not have the capacity within Malaysia to develop it. But then the same speech, Mahathir Mohamad criticized US's saber rattling and criticized China's moves in the South China Sea. Moving on to India. India is a massive consumer of Chinese technologies. Smartphones, for instance, are a $28.5 billion market in India. And Xiaomi, a Chinese company, accounts for the lion's share of this at 30%, and Huawei is also making headway there. Chinese technology is cheap, and Indian consumers and companies are always hungry for a good deal. While security considerations are still very much on the minds of the Indian Department of Telecommunications, India would not be willing to ban any potential suppliers entirely. Especially with India's 5G trials rapidly approaching, it will not want its choices constrained in any way. Especially because we're aiming to move from buyer to supplier, and we aim to build our own industries through these partnerships. The second casualty, as I've mentioned, is a nuanced tech agenda. If you just Google 5G right now, you'll see that, aside from basic background, most of the results will be dominated by Huawei, US-China competition, and just the entire race narrative. Every second headline has 5G race, tech race, who's winning the race. Not everything has to be a race. That's the beauty of globalization. What we really need to be talking about right now is whether we're even ready for the kind of shifts that 5G will bring. Some of the core applications enabled by 5G, for example, are for industrial revolution technologies and IoT. Given that cybersecurity capacity in most countries is still fairly poor, and we're still struggling with basic frameworks for privacy and user security, are we really ready for a world where every single appliance in your house is connected to the internet? How should we go about separating fact from Russia-manufactured fiction on the risks that 5G technologies bring?
Thank you. Maya?
I'm gonna stand up and walk around. My name is Mayan. I'm the Executive Director for the Asia Cloud Computing Association. I also lecture at the National University of Singapore, so I'm used to the students who are sitting in the corner and, not paying attention. Which is why I like to walk around. I brought up my tablet here because I want to show you guys this Excel spreadsheet that I have here. And it's a map of where the spectrum allocations are for 5G testing around the world. Now, some countries have already allocated 5G testing. Some people have allowed trials. Some people are considering. Some people have said, yes, 5G will be in this particular spectrum, the 7 gigahertz spectrum, for example, that will be unlicensed. And this is quite interesting because one of the subtopics and my main focus of what I'm going to tell you today is about this fear of the splinter net. When I looked at the word in the write-up, it gave me a bit of a shudder. It reminded me of Brad and Angelina, and you had Bragdalina, and it was just like, oh, okay, now this is like terrible, a terrible word. But it is a fear, right? We're afraid of the balkanization of the internet. We're afraid of, wow, there's a split in the internet. I show you this because I think that yes, we are in a moment where we're sort of trying to decide which technology spectrum, quite literally, which frequencies the dominant chipset is probably going to be made on. But is it right to connect that with the fear that the internet will split? Now, I want to present three things to you, and it'll be in the form of three questions, okay? So the first example of the splinter net that everybody likes to bring up is China, of course. And I think that we'll hear a little bit. You can save all the hard questions for him, okay? Because I'm from Singapore. We're sort of, not near China, but he is. So you can have all the difficult questions to my next speaker. But let's think about. Actually, let me not go to China first, but let me go to Russia. Did you know that Russia earlier this year, in February, made an announcement and decided that, say, you know what, we're going to have an experiment. We're going to shut off our internet from the outside world because we want to, let me quote, we want to consider an experiment to disconnect temporarily from the internet to gauge the country's cyber defenses. Can Russia internet or RUNet exist if it's isolated? So they're testing if the Russian internet can still communicate locally or if it's still subject to interception if it's shut off from the internet. So I'm not quite sure why we're so afraid of 5G, Huawei, China, if there's another country who is saying, hi, I want to be sent to the silent room, and we want to just test it by ourselves. So question one, and think about university networks. When I first went into university, this might date me. When I first went into university, my university was only starting to put in those points in the walls. And you had to be connected to the intranet in order to connect to the network. So my question number one, aren't countries / companies / any sort of intranet, isn't that already a splinter of the internet? It still runs on the internet, you use a computer to connect to it. So why are we so afraid of countries running their own little intranets? Just think of a country as a really, really big company. So that's just one question. I'm not saying that's the right question to ask, but that's a question. Second thing, the Great Firewall of China. Well, if you go to Shanghai, if you go to Beijing, if you go to different places in China, you get different things being blocked. So, well, Facebook we know is blocked, Google is blocked and all of its services, Twitter is blocked, I hear that Wikipedia recently also got blocked. Question number two for all of us. Are content blocks, are places where content are blocked, specific types of content, are they considered splinter nets? Because if we do consider China and the Great Firewall of China a splinter net, then my question is Iran, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam. In Singapore, we have blocks on certain types of content as well. Are content blocks splinters of the internet, or are they merely just content blocks? That's the second question. The third scenario, in South Korea, there is a very limited amount of services for non-Koreans because a lot of services online for Naver, for example, requires you to either register your South Korean ID number in order to use the services. And in that case, the third question is, are login only sites therefore considered also a splinter? Because after all, if you don't have a Facebook account, you're also considered, you're not part of the community. But of course, everybody will exchange their personal information for that connection. So you get into that community. So question number three is, are login-only sites considered splinter nets? I think the biggest question that I have is, why are we so afraid of the internet splitting? Because I think the splitting of the internet kind of is already here. So I leave you with that. I hope that's some food for thought as you continue your dinner. Thank you very much.
Man, I just want to also ask you, how do you think the 5G debate is going to,
the 5G
a lot of what you focused on was, which is clearly a reality in terms of countries going their own way, either by way of content or by rather, extraordinary measures to physically wall themselves off. How do you think the 5G debate is going to implicate that development?
My question is the 5G debate even connected to that, the splinter net? Because right now it looks like it is indeed a very geopolitical thing, and I think that Trisha has done a really great job in outlining some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. What is 5G going to do to these scenarios? I actually don't see that happening right now in the first instance, because make that connection for me is my request, number one. Number two, the splinter net I think is already here. You have to define it. Do we need to be so afraid of that? Is my question.
Wang?
Okay. All right. I would like to begin my remarks with sort of disclaimer. I'm not speaking for Huawei or Huawei pays me anything. But after Megan suggests that there possibly will be many questions coming for me, then I think I probably should change my mind. I should charge Huawei for all the questions coming to me regarding 5G and Huawei. Maybe one question, $10,000. So give me 5, give me 10. So that will make me rich, and I'll be happy to buy everyone drink here after I collect this $10,000 for all the questions regarding Huawei. But let me sort of make it straight to first sort of hands on with this. You must have heard this many times. This American narrative. This is very typical, the kind of cliches you repeat sometimes become so-called political truth, which is, oh, Huawei is so successful because it links to Chinese government and military, etc. I think this cannot be. This is a completely wrong-headed, I would say, wrong-headed, misleading narrative coming out of the United States. The truth is, I think Huawei actually beats all its competitors because it spends more than all its competitors combined in research and development. I mean, pure and simple. But fortunately, the Americans, they are just not able to face squarely this reality, and therefore they create this narrative that, oh, Huawei, stealing our technology, Huawei is this link to Chinese government and military. That's what makes Huawei successful. That cannot be farther away from the truth. So what essentially, we have to ask, what essentially the United States government is doing this whole thing? I mean, for me, I think it's just so clear, it's so simple. It's essentially the United States government is doing is that when you cannot compete against Huawei in the free market, then you start going after Huawei by using all this political power, national security power. And to be honest, I think this is very shameful. It's despite all the repeated the American accusations against Huawei, I think the U.S. government failed to present any solid evidence whatsoever against Huawei, which would substantially explain against Huawei that Huawei's services and products actually compromises the user country's national security. And look at what Huawei is doing. Actually, Huawei is willingly give all its sources codes to all the countries that potentially are going to use its services and products. And I will say, well, I cannot think of anything more transparent than that for any tech companies in that world. And to be honest, I mean, look, UK, Germany, or even Canada, all those the allies of the United States, so to speak, they have looked into those source codes of Huawei and examined thoroughly of all its placements, everything, and they arrive at this conclusion that there's nothing within Huawei that will be considered defined as sort of threatening to their national security, which of course would be very embarrassing to the U.S. government. So it's so obvious national security just an excuse here. So the real thing, what is the real thing with Huawei? It's because Huawei is doing so good at the 5G technology. It beats all American companies, and therefore the so-called tech hegemony is a goal, and to some extent, you might argue that the tech new Cold War is the format. It's what at least I think some ultra-conservatives, or even anti-China folks in the U.S. government is publicly at Peking. And I'm not sure if you any of you watch, maybe many of you watch Daily Show by with Trevor Noah. If you don't, you must see that. There's recently also it's hilarious show regarding 5G and Huawei. And you know, I think Trevor, he makes a very good point, which is simply by beating or going after Huawei doesn't make America automatically sort of have that 5G technology. So what happened for American companies, AT&T, Verizon, etc.? What did they do? They actually fake it. I'm not kidding. They just fake it. You know, say, oh, now we are providing this 5G technology to our customers. Actually, it is so-called 4G plus. So think about that. So, and he's also making this maybe half jokingly. You know, part of the reason that the American US government is going after Huawei, it's not because Huawei service products are so insecure, or quite the contrary, because you're too secure for the American intelligence, you know, agencies, folks try to penetrate, and therefore they are going crazy. And I'm not sure it's true or not, but that gives us a lot of food for thought. Do I still have time? 1 minute? or I'll stop here. I know that many questions will be coming.
I think
I'll stop here.
you may have to.
Sure.
So first of all, I hope you will get safely from the dinner to your hotel room. But you know, let's engage with some of the points that you've raised, and we will open it up for questions, and I'm sure there will be many. I agree with you personally that this debate has nothing to do with national security. But surely Huawei cannot claim that it has outcompeted the United States or its other peers in the free market, when the American argument, at least one stand of it, is precisely that Huawei has been the subject of many subsidies from the Chinese government, as American technology companies have been when they were in their adolescence from the American government, or European companies have been when they were national champions or in their adolescence in the European Union. Once you've received the benefit of those subsidies, you're using the protection that you've received domestically to flex your muscles in the international market. And some people obviously have a problem with it. China has so far very much played along in the rules that were set by the United States with regards to the liberal international order, at the core of which is the rules on international trade. Now, China made a decision in 2001 to join the WTO. It has made a decision now to apply for the status of a market economy. So it is very clearly trying to embed itself in the liberal international order, having been a sustained beneficiary of it for the last 2 decades or more, right? If all is fair in love and war, surely Huawei or people who do support Huawei and rightly claim that national security may be in fact a peripheral concern in this debate, must acknowledge the fact that they are playing by the rules, and the rules were already set well before Huawei entered this debate. National, for instance, like I said, Article 21 was part of this. China signed up to the WTO knowing full well that there was something called Article 21, which essentially allowed a country to ban technology or trade in technology on the basis of national security. And national security is very much a sovereign choice of the country that is enforcing this. So the countries that have banned Huawei or are in the process of banning Huawei, or at least thinking about banning Huawei with regards to the 5G trials, have clearly made their sovereign choice or exercise. How does Huawei respond to the fact that it has been a beneficiary, and much like other Chinese companies in the digital economy, have been beneficiaries of the rules of trade or rules of commerce in the liberal international order? How can you turn around overnight and say, this is all about Americans trying to outcompete us in the free market? Surely the devil cannot quote the scripture after being a beneficiary of it so long. Yeah? So the first question that I suspect a lot of folks would want to ask you as well is, one, are you trying to change the paradigm? Are you now trying to suggest that China, having been a beneficiary of the liberal international order, will no longer play by those rules? will now, will try to create some sort of exceptional model for itself where it is the beneficiary and it is the core of it is at the center of global governance, and we decide what the rules should be. Or are you trying to, you rightly said that there is an American narrative that has been, it's a Western narrative, not just something that has been born and incubated, in the United States. If there is a narrative, then what is the Chinese counter narrative to it? What is the intellectual disposition behind this narrative? What is the economic disposition behind this narrative? For example, Mahathir Mohamad, who Trisha said. Mahathir Mohamad defended Malaysia's decisions to go with the 5G trials based on Malaysia's bilateral relationship with China. He did not offer any commitment to multilateralism or any commitment to free and open trade as you did. How is China positioning itself as the notional supplier of values such as free trade or open markets? I do not see that narrative coming out from Huawei or from the PRC. So what is that narrative that is coming out from China? And why are we not hearing more of it?
Okay. All right. So am I supposed to collect my first $7 question? Yeah. Okay. Or should I wait for us first? All right. First of all, tell me, is there any American high-tech, American sort of company that do not receive subsidies coming from Peking? You cannot make one, right? So you cannot so what the American narrative is doing is just twisting the story and therefore presenting a very distorted picture and try to demonize public. This is what they are trying to do. And you are also making a very good point. China, of course, one of the big beneficiaries of the current multi-level trading system. That's why China has remained and will be the staunch defender of this current existing multi-level trading system. And China has made its position on that very clear. And when it comes to this counter narrative, maybe it's just I just would like to point you to this recent development. So just try to compare these two approaches. One is American approach, another one is the Chinese approach when it comes to this 5G technology. All right. So the American approach is that America first, meaning everyone else being the last, right? So American enjoy this tech hegemony or monopoly, and that sounds very familiar, right? You are either with us or against us. That's the threat the United States government issuing to all its allies and partners. Sounds very familiar, right? And here is the Chinese approach, and in fact, just happened, I think, most recently, yesterday, or the day before yesterday, Chinese President Xi just said that when he was in Moscow, actually. He said China would be willing to share 5G technology with the rest of the world. So China doesn't actually believe it should monopolize this 5G technology or prevent others from trying to acquire that or to whatever it takes, or even using political power, national security power to prevent from other competitors to acquire it. No. What the President Xi is saying that we were willing to work together jointly with all others, all partners, and that's the only way we can make progress in technological development, and what we believe that bring more benefits and prosperity to the world. I think they speak for themselves. So it's one. So you want a counter narrative now? I give you one counter narrative.
That's a semblance. Actually, it is. I'm thankful that you did talk about it because it's not something that is often seen in the mainstream press. It's. I think we can all agree that the debate is more than perhaps implications for national security, but the debate is far more than national security, or there is a lot more than that meets the eye. But we haven't seen an economic or an intellectual or a philosophical narrative that is coming from China, which responds to the responds to the narrative that has been set by the United States, not just at this point, at this moment where we are debating 5G. Like I said, in the late 80s, Ronald Reagan, his administration blocked the acquisition of Fairchild by Fujitsu. So that was lawfare of a different sort, and you're seeing, in a different sector, you're seeing the similar application of similar words. My only point is that countries that now oppose the United States on this issue, such as China or Russia, Russia has been one of the most prolific users of Article 21 and this national security exception in blocking trade. My only point, and perhaps you can take this debate forward once we fielded questions as well, is that we have made the decision to live in the rules that were set by America at one point of time. Is it China's proposition that we are not going to change those rules? Right? You cannot position yourself as the defender of the liberal international order when a core rule in that liberal international order is that you can ban trade in technology if it impinges on your national security. Right? So, I mean, you can respond to that, you don't have to, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of other people.
I would be happy to make very quick, response. China actually, we have to make this very straight here. It's not China that wants to change the world that it is the United States want to change our and the Chinese position is that, look, we are okay if you wanted to change the world, but let's talk about that, all stakeholders, members, through a consultation, but not using unilateralism or simply by bullying, by start a trade war, imposing tariffs against others. You're going to disrupt the whole global economy by doing that. That's what China is opposed to. China is not saying, apparently, I think not only China, many other countries, India included, we do believe there are some deficiencies in the existing system, and we have to fix that. The way to do that is not through trade war, it's not through unilateral, which is the American approach, and which we propose.
Thanks. Let me try and take a round of questions, beginning with John. Please keep your questions short so that we can go through all of them.
That's a little bit of a comment. So I just want to pick up the national security threat first. In one comment, our colleague has done a very fine job of presenting the official Chinese perspective. The United States does not have, it's commendable, and it's a bit of a hostile audience, it's not, the United States does not have players in this game. The competitors of Huawei in this game are Nokia and Ericsson. So the United States is going to have to go abroad to get it. As far as the U.S. in its discussion about 5G, it's basically been incompetent. Right? They're threatening their allies and going, you're not doing it, we cut you off. So here's my analysis. And I'm not telling anybody whether to buy Huawei or not to buy Huawei, but here's what you can think about. So the number one criteria is, if you do not want to be a signals intelligence colony of a major power, you need to be able to verify the integrity of your telecommunications core infrastructure. And the 5G is so tightly coupled to the high speed that it's right into the core infrastructure. Now, if you count up countries that are capable of doing these verifications, probably around 20, which means we've probably got 200 countries that can't do it. So you are signals intelligence colonies. Okay? And so you need a partner of some kind, and you pick your partner, and they can help you deal with it. Second point is, in case of a war, if you have a war and you have the other guy's technology, in place, you may have difficulties. So this one hasn't been mentioned. People don't like thinking about it. That's a whole issue there. And so I think there's one last thing, which is Huawei is on track to own the entire market. So it uses very aggressive competitive techniques. We can go into it later. And even the Europeans, which is the home market to Ericsson and Nokia, are buying Huawei, so they're not even getting their own home market. So if you want to have competition in this sector, you need to support multiple companies that are engaging, and then that gives you choice. In terms of the trade issue, I won't go into the details now. We want to go down there. The trade response of this administration occurs due to the problem of large-scale IP theft for at least 25 years, to the tune of $3 trillion in cyber-enabled IP theft, and probably another $2 trillion in coerced technology transfer to the U.S. alone. And in this trade deal, they're going to let China walk away and keep everything if they would agree to dial back these programs. And apparently the leadership decided at the last minute that they didn't want to dial it back. And I think for all of our benefits, it would be much better to try to avoid the overall trade war. And I think the telecommunications question is really a separate issue. One just last point on that, which is, if you look at the Defense Science Board 2013 study, they have a taxonomy of signals intelligence actors, and the big ones, to wit, US, Russia, China, spend tens of billions of dollars a year, which accumulates over time, during signals intelligence against whatever the targets are. So from a Chinese point of view, this is a way to move up to that level 6. And surely, I'm sure the US government knows this, they won't talk about it. So they don't want to see that happen if they can avoid it.
Any other questions from this side? Please don't give me your official country positions, guys. I can read that on the Department of State's website.
My question goes to the gentleman who is, for now, answering for Huawei. Don't you think you have, China has a big problem in trying to win over the entire world to buy the 5G technology, especially because a lot of products that come from China are usually much low level. In fact, most of the time, we are able to tell that a product is good when it has a label made in China for the US market or for Europe. Don't you think it's going to be extremely difficult for Huawei to sell the 5G technology to companies who have a mindset that most of the products from China are either counterfeit or they're much cheaper or they are not the high of the high standard? Thank you.
Excellent. I think this is a great point, perhaps also for Wang to consider, not to put you on the spot, but the argument that Huawei is building an economy that is essentially horses for courses. You claim to sell products that are of high quality and cater to the demands of the open market. But the fact is that your products as Huawei to a certain constituency is far below which is the allegation there. So I think when the 5G debate is implicated in that as well. What are the stakes for developing countries if the quality of products that come from Chinese, Huawei is just an example of an actor here. If the quality of products that go to certain digital economies are lesser than the quality of products that are offered by Huawei and its peers in China to advanced economies, whether it's 5G or other 5G enabled equipment or others, then is there any sort of reason why countries in this part of the world should sign up to all the narratives that you are talking about? So let's just keep that question in mind as well, and I think there was another.
Thank you. My question is for Mohan or maybe for Arun. Actually, I think we didn't talk about the commercial landscape. I think John mentioned there are two players in this market, Huawei and Samsung. And Ericsson and Nokia are inferior, and Samsung is at least 12 months, 9-12 months behind Huawei in technology. So maybe US doesn't have a player, but maybe some sort of cooperation, cooperation between supporting Samsung in this area that may be interesting bilateral cooperation opportunity, because AT&T and Verizon, these companies are not even in the same league. So Samsung seems to be the only potential competitor for Huawei in the future. So basically, the question is like, how do you see the competitive landscape, maybe from a technological perspective, and from the geopolitical perspective, for some large players like UK or allies, it's based on decision of national security matter. UK, if already still buying some Huawei material, like even until last couple of months ago, there was a decision. So, but for other countries, it's basically lack of options. I mean, for many African countries or Latin American countries or countries like Turkey, India, Mexico, so if they want to transform to 5G, so it's not a matter of national security, it's basically technology availability, and it's so it may create some tensions, like it happened, for example, with Turkey's decision to buy S-400 missile system, because there was even an alternative for the missile defense system, but there is no alternative for 5G infrastructure. So.
Let's take one more question and then go back.
Yes, my question would be also for our colleagues from India and Singapore, and maybe also it might be nice to hear an answer from any of the African colleagues that have any opinion on the subject. I come from the US, and I also see that our digital and technology companies live off of interactions with the government. So companies like Microsoft, they've made all of their billions of dollars based on US patent protectionism. So that is not free trade, that is an intervention by the government in the economy to redistribute wealth upwards towards patent holders. They've made millions based on internet research. The whole, internet invented by the US government and military research is why we had a first mover advantage. They make tons of money off US government subsidies, patent protectionism, as I mentioned, government contracts, and just the US government rule setting. They also have subsidies for exports. We know this. We have an overseas private investment corporation. There's just many different ways that our companies also benefit from being part of the US government. And the revelations of Edward Snowden also revealed that we, as the United States, make our technology companies also disclose trade secrets of our trade partners and competitors. So, it happened in negotiations on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with the EU-US, that we were spying on their trade negotiators, discussions of the negotiators in their private meetings. That's obviously a comparative advantage in trade, and the same thing with Brazil. These are just a couple of the revelations. So I don't. Obviously, there's a difference between China and the U.S., and I'm not trying to say they're the same country, but I am trying to, just bring some nuance to the debate. That coming from the U.S., you always have this they're the bad guy, and we're the pristine, awesome, defender of the international order that never breaks rules, and it's a little bit hard to take that sometimes. So I just wonder if our colleagues from other countries, do you get a more nuanced story that includes some balance about the fact that all giant companies have benefited from the largesse and investment from their government? Is that something that, if I were an African country decision maker, I would be looking at this whole panoply of things and then saying things, thinking about which telecommunications company might the comment that you had made before. If you have a foreign company controlling your telecommunications infrastructure, how secure are you no matter what country you are? This seems to be a problem. So, I would assume that could be a live issue for anyone, and I don't understand why it's so terrible if one country does it, but the US doing it is perfectly fine in the global narrative. It just kind of bewilders me as to why that's the case. I'd like to hear from folks about why that is.
Trisha, you want to weigh? So let me just go through let's go through your responses first, and then if I could request Dr. Rai to come in and weigh in on this debate. Dr. Rai is, until very recently, he was the National Cybersecurity Coordinator of India, the first person to hold that post, and I'm hoping that he can offer us some perspectives on how the Indian approach to this debate has been so far. But Trisha, can I request you to weigh in on this debate so far?
Address the most recent question first, because just speaking on India's position, India definitely has a healthy amount of skepticism of both the US and China. We're almost notorious for it. So that's something that is well established in India. We do have a narrative of well, US companies also sell your data. The Patriot Act enables the government to access all forms of data from private companies. So yes, that's the answer to that question. wanted to make a comment and not to pile on to the China bashing, but there was something in the narrative you were building about China as a defender of the liberal order, which I found problematic, and that is that you often say that, okay, we are breaking the rules, but the US has also broken the same rules. You can't hold yourself to that standard and then just say, okay, we're the defenders of the liberal order. Why would you want to peg yourself there?
Ma'am?
I like the idea of that we've been discussing, this idea of narratives. The narratives have changed. I really think that the narratives haven't actually changed. We're now actually, from a sociological point of view, reaping the effects of globalization. Because when I was younger, when I was in secondary school, I used to go to these camps and they would be like, globalization is the best, the theme is globalization, we should all learn about each other, because deep down inside we're all the same. But the fact of the matter is, at this stage of human civilization and thinking about things, we're actually realizing that we're same, but we're different. And that's why I don't really think that the narratives have actually changed. I think that we do still seek the self first. So globalization, good, yes, but we do want to be still protecting our own people. But now, guess what? Because of globalization, there are intermarriages, and like, we're our people anyway. So we don't really know anymore. So we really have this amazing tension that has now basically exploded because somebody said one particular country first, and then everybody realized, hold on, why not my country first as well? And that sort of popped a pimple. And that's really, it's just ugly at the moment for everybody. So I really don't think the narratives have actually changed, they've just become sharper. And I'm actually quite interested to see how we as people actually move to that next stage of thinking about where globalization, free trade is actually going to take us. Which brings me, I think, to my next response, which is this idea of free trade and the perspectives towards China and other companies from other countries. I feel it is a system. We have a trading system, and I come from Singapore. We like our rankings, and we know how to game the system. Okay, you want the best airport in the world. We know the test paper, and then we're just gonna make sure that we take off all the answers. You want the highest waterfall in the world. We'll build it indoors. We know how to game the system. So I feel, my second observation, I feel that there is this trading system, and some countries like China have started to learn how to game the system, and they're gaming it pretty well. And then some people who are the rule watchers are saying, hey, not fair! You're not supposed to go to your mom! And you're like, okay, well, it's still sort of fair. And I say this because I think that Huawei has done an excellent job. One thing which people don't realize about Huawei is that in order to actually get the status of being a company that is bequeathed with government subsidies, it has had to survive the extremely cutting-throat business situation in China itself, to survive within China as a domestic company itself, to be successful there. It is cutthroat there. And so I think that there may not be very much to the opinion that Huawei isn't globally competitive, because I think it kind of is quite competitive. I do agree that they have spent quite a lot of money thrown into the 5G networks, which brings me to my third point. I think there was a question, what did Huawei do to grow in the competitive market? What are the other options? Again, I think it's a gaming system. The reason why I brought up my diagram with the frequencies just now is because there's a very nerdy reason why Huawei is one of the global leaders, and that's because they realized that the standard setting is a game and a place where they have actually participated in. They've participated, I think, in the ISO's discussions and IECs, and all of these are volunteer run, by the way. 2 years ago, I think that China decided to host one of the ISO, I can't remember, it was 27,000 something or other, some number in Wuhan. And that meant that a lot of their own researchers could actually travel to Wuhan, give presentations on why you should be choosing this particular chipset design against this particular other chipset design. So they've actually spent a lot of time invested in that particular system. And I think a lot of people, Ericsson, Samsung, other people, they woke up a little bit late to that fact. And therefore, I think that that's where Huawei got its competitive advantage. They actually participated in it. Like I said, game the system. It knew the system. It's working the system, which I think is kind of fair.
Okay, right. I cannot recall how many $1,000 I can
He's
connect.
got a long list.
Right. First floor, beginning with appreciate this gentleman. I don't actually remember how many questions you raised, so how many $1,000 I'm supposed to connect. But first of all, I would say that if you're not presenting an official American story, and I'm not presenting an official Chinese story, so yeah, I'm sorry, on equal footing here. This question, China we are the largest developing country. And we are still developing, maybe rapidly. So, therefore, which means we have climbed the ladder of value chains actually over the decades. Yes, the impression many people have about Chinese products, service, low quality, maybe low price, but not really reliable. That was true. But also, I think it's changing rapidly. Huawei is, the matter of fact that the United States government is going after Huawei will give you the confidence that Huawei is the best company in the world because it beats all American competitors, right? And Huawei really offers this kind of has the best quality and best price as well. Of course, Huawei doesn't claim, cannot claim Huawei has the best technology in each and every field. It has some or quite a number of therefore, Huawei is quite a global competitor in that regard. But still, I think it just reminds me, goes back to the President Xi's, the approach. I really like it actually. It says, 5G things not for, that's my interpretation. He didn't say that. But my understanding that essentially what he was saying, 5G technology is not something for some country to monopolize. We are willing to cooperate with all the world, all partners from the world and try to develop further because it will bring more benefits and prosperity to the world. And why not we adopting this approach instead of saying we are the first and you guys are being the last, and sort of zero-sum mentality. That really not helpful. What else? Trisha, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. We should aim higher instead of look aim low. And that was a bad example. I should apologize for that. Looking to the United States as an example. We should do better altogether. Next stage of globalization. Please allow me maybe do a little bit of self-promotion here because I just published a book recently. It's called Re-Globalization When China Meets the World Again. It was in Chinese edition, but I have the contract with Rutledge. Hopefully the English edition will come out this year. So essentially, this is what I did is that I engaged the globalization debate. And my point is that we are not, globalization has not come to an end, nor are we entering into a deglobalization period. But rather, globalization entering into a new stage, which I give it a label I call it re-globalization. A lot of process, a lot of things are going on, emerging economies, China, India, many others, and including CPTPP, those are the forces that really push, I think, globalization or what I call the reglobalization process going forward. So stay tuned for my
Thanks.
book. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me now go to Dr. Rai, who has seen this both from the perspective of an Indian regulator, but also has engaged in serious conversations with his counterparts elsewhere in the world, and is, served in this office at, in the early stages of this debate, and especially as the crisis worsened. To the extent that you are able to tell us what transpired, how is India looking at it? And have countries like India, which crucially are going to rely on 5G technology, is there some sort of middle path, or is there some solution that can keep the politics out of it, or is it a hopeless cause of it?
Thank you, Arun. I never thought that I would participate in the debate. I was only a listener because of the other background which you mentioned that. In fact, I was going to ask a question whether what is the root cause of technology or the commercial or what kind of a root cause, and you had asked very relevant questions to Chinese. I think the issue is 5G has come up just because 5G is being launched there. It's not actually the 5G, it's a much deeper and much practical issue is there. Which has come up because of the technological kind of thing. 5G is not a simple upgradeness to the 3G or 4G the way it has to be 2G, 3G, 4G. It was not like that kind of a upgradation to the technology. It's a complete paradigm shift in the technology there. And in the paradigm shift, it is certainly, we must admit that the Chinese took a lead role in terms of defining technological standard, which I'm sure the Western are really feeling a little bit pinch, defining the standards which has become up. And I am not sure how things will lead to, because the standard process of the 5G is still not completed. The first version has come up that also has not been adopted by the ITU. I think it will go to, and particularly the security standard is little far away to do that. How things will take place, it's very, very difficult to predict at this point of a time. As my friend has said, we are talking about a 4G plus, we are not talking about a 5G, that kind of thing. And there have been really a problem. The kind of implementation has come up in Chicago or in Shanghai or in Seoul. They are largely 4G plus, where the 5G compatibility with the 4G compatibility has come up there. Those are not the 5G exact implementation which the technology is supposed to do that kind of thing. It's a much deeper issue, and because we are shifting our technological kind of a paradigm shift, and larger issues have come up there. Maybe I think everyone has in my view, everyone has a right to protect the technology which they have produced. Chinese also, Americans also, or the Western countries also, they have right to protect the technology within the reasonable means, and they can share the technology with the reasonable means there. So it's a much deeper issue. As far as India is concerned, the new government which has taken over about a week ago, they have said that they will revive the field trials within 100 days, which India was supposed to conduct the field trials. And we have invited almost everywhere in the work to whosoever develop the technology to work with the government of India and the different service provider to establish or to do the field trial on the particular technology. India has also announced that by 2020 we will be certainly deploying the 5G in certain sections, in certain parts of the country, not the entire country. So we will conduct the field trial as regard which company, not company, those issues are still being considered by the government, and I'm sure the stand will be very, very clear in the progress sooner or later. But let us admit also, I won't be able to say, let us admit also what the Western world, the Americans are saying about the national national security is an issue. Because I have seen, as recently as a couple of months ago, some of the companies in China are getting engaged in diverting the traffic. Internet traffic was being diverted. I think number of in Africa also it suffered. In Nigeria, Kenya, they also suffered there. There was an attempt made in different parts of the world, India too. So keeping those communication aspect in the mind, which incident which happened there, when you confront the concerned Chinese company, the Chinese companies, they start with there is a inadvertent kind of a thing. There no reasonable, no logical explanation has come forward there. So whatever the worries, the best, because 5G technologies are to a different technology, as I said it. So whatever incident has happened in last 1 year, the worries which the West or the Americans or the others say, they are not far away. They are the real concerns far away. The Western countries, the companies which are manufacturing the whether it is a Samsung or a Nokia is not the entire end-to-end equipment there. One of the reasons the Chinese company is in a focus is because they produce end-to-end equipment. And the real competitor for them is basically Samsung parts, which produce from device, routing, switches, and every kind of electronic equipment is there. So they have a real competitor in terms of the Samsung in the world. No other company is a competitor there. That itself is a worry, because end-to-end is coming from one company, and the entire communication will be controlled by the one company, whether it's a Samsung or it is a Samsung or Huawei. I'm not appreciating this in there, but that is a cause of worry for implementing a adequate security measures for the traffic incident which happened in the last quarter of the 2018 should not get repeated. And in fact, I must say that the incident it did happen in isolated manner. They were getting repeated over a period of week or 10 days in the different parts of the world. So the worries are quite genuine, and I think the solution need to come up, adequate protection need to come up, adequate assurance need to come up from the company which are producing and installing end-to-end equipment in terms of monitoring, in terms of sending the reply. I certainly don't agree whatever I understand that if you show me the source code and if you give me the source code, I can find out what is wrong or what is right. It's very difficult to say, it can't be done by having the source code. The Chinese are first one to say offer the source code. But the source code changes drastically in a couple of months' time. So those things are, very deep, complex games are there. So in my view, the issue is a very complex. Include technological issues, commercial issues, but more larger strategic issues, because we have entered into the different paradigm of the technology with the 5G, AI, and the ML. They're all coming together. Today we are talking convergence of technology. We are not talking about one technology, single communication technology. And I think it will take a little time to get solved. In this game, if the Chinese say they are safe, they are not.
Thanks. Any other? So Wendell has a question. Any other questions? Alright, so let's just take these two and then close.
Yes, I want to build on these last comments, and I agree that that's very much the issue. But I also think that this Huawei conflict is coming up in the midst of something much broader that's going on between the U.S. and China. And we're kind of acting as if this is all about 5G and Huawei. And I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, the fascinating thing is that we have a government in the United States that doesn't have the support of the majority of citizens. And yet they do sort of support the government on this issue. Even though I would say there's a lot of misunderstanding of China and China's intentions in America. There's a lot of misperceptions going on, there's a lot of misinformation going on, but nevertheless, the American people over the last 10 or 20 years have become very uncomfortable with the relationship they have with China. First of all, we have this massive imbalance of trade. We've had it for a long time. And secondly, whether China has taken America's intellectual property or America has defined what property it owns or not owns, we could probably debate that until hell freezes over. That's not going to get settled. But what is clear to most of the American people is that our markets have been open, and in area after area, China's have not. So now suddenly, in this case, and why it does become 5G important, is our markets are supposed to be open to a critical piece of the infrastructure that we now then become dependent on China. Now that's all okay if we are truly moving toward a cooperative world order. But there's a lot of people in America who that either isn't what they want or it's not what they believe is happening. So we suddenly have this whole issue around whether there is going to be, should be, maybe a conflict of civilizations. And Huawei had just become the symbol of that, and whether or not America's security should be dependent upon Chinese control, or at least Chinese manufacture of critical aspects of their infrastructure, regardless of whether it is secure now or not. Do we know it will be secure 10 years from now?
One last question then I'll come back.
Hi, Mallory Noodle from Arun team. I agree that this is bigger than 5G, but I'm extremely concerned about it because it's going to, these global geopolitics are going to get us with bad technology that's going to have a profound effect in the future. And I do think that there's a risk of a splinter net. There isn't one now, but so I'll make a connection there. So my team works in all of these standard setting bodies. We're at the IEEE and we're looking at devices and the chips in those devices. We're at 3GPP, which is actually the standard setting body for the 5G standard. We're at the IETF, which is the protocols for how the larger internet runs, regardless of how the internet is delivered. And finally, we're at the ITU, where there are some aspects of how 5G works that will be worked out in ITU. So we're in all of these places, and we have this global view of where the problems are. What wasn't mentioned before is that some of these standard setting bodies are actually US companies. And so when the US Bureau of Commerce came out with the rule against Huawei, both the IEEE and the IETF, because they're US companies, were under that rule. IETF wasn't affected because it does open publishing, it doesn't make any money off of its publications, but the IEEE does. And so they issued a notice to everyone in the IEEE that Huawei would be removed from all reviews of standards, and they would be removed as chairs of committees because of the rule. They've walked that back, and for a very interesting reason, because people freaked out. People globally said, no, these are international standard-setting bodies. You're American companies, but we rely on the IEEE to create global standards, and you're compromising the standards for a geopolitical spat, basically. So IEEE's walked that back, but it's only because the US Bureau of Commerce was pushed to putting an exception to their rule, specifically for standard setting. I'm really glad that that happened, because there was a moment for about 10 days in which we thought that Huawei is at all of these standard setting bodies. I would say that it's in two ways, right? They're there and then they're implementing it. I don't think the implementations are particularly good. I think that the way that I remember the audit that was done of Huawei's base stations was actually really bad. It was very poor. There were several different implementations of standards running on the base stations. The auditors couldn't even sometimes figure out what was being run. So the audit was not good. It wasn't concerning, but it also wasn't clean. So I guess what I want to say is that it is really important for all ISPs, all internet service providers, especially the ones that we can't see, right? To be cooperating with each other, to be in the standard setting spaces, and I think that this example of the rule that may have affected standard setting is a good example of how this could go very wrong, because we need all of these ISPs to be talking to each other, or we will have a splinter net. They need to be peering with each other at the tier 1 level. They need to be using interoperable standards that work across the world, regardless of where people are. And so I'm glad to see that that didn't happen in standard setting space, but that is a real risk, and it could happen again. So we need to keep politics out of the technology standard setting.
Thank you. Finally, someone read the brief. So let's conclude with, please don't take more than a minute each. Let's start with Trisha, and feel free to respond to the questions that have come up, or you can also use it to sum up the day.
I'll actually address Mallory's point because she raised an important thing, which is something we underestimate when it comes to the US's position in this competition. That's its agenda-setting power, is because it controls all these institutions. That is perhaps the more lasting effect of US power rather than the ability of its companies to actually effectively compete in the market. I'm going to conclude with that.
Thank you, Mallory. That was the discussion that I actually prepared for. I had a lot of nerdy notes on standard settings and how everybody should play a part, but we went into China and then never got out again. I'd like to comment on the cybersecurity risk. I feel that you brought up a really, really good point, and I feel that the discussion about equipment, etc., you can almost distill it down to pure risk management. As a country or as a company, you never want to put all your eggs in one basket, right? You never want to...
How very Singaporean.
Well, we are very concerned about things, so we know our risk. You never want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want to make sure that your risk is contained, right? So in the same way that you have food security and you make sure that you have a diverse amount of food sources for your country, in the same way you never want to have your end-to-end telecommunication network just owned by one company. Oh, somebody better help her before that whole thing falls down. You never want to have your whole entire telecommunications network owned by one single company. It's called vendor lock-in. You never want to have vendor lock-in. So that's just devoid of all sort of geopolitical noise. And I think that risk management is one lens, a really good lens, when you can start to separate out a lot of the chaff.
I absolutely agree with your assessment that this whole 5G thing again is part of a bigger picture. It's part of the broader trend we are witnessing. For good or ill, I think I also completely share your concern that we've been through the old Cold War, original Cold War, so to speak. Some people, to be very honest, they're publicly advocating a new Cold War between China and the United States. But I really don't think that's something, is something we need, something that the world needs. We have to figure out a way how to reject those more sort of negative sort of aspect of globalization. It's not an easy task. It's very difficult. It's very complicated picture here. But I think the only way going forward should be no new Cold War between China and the United States.
All right. On that happy note, let's end. I've never seen people more awake at 10 o'clock on the first day of a conference, but I suppose that's the reason why we took this debate for a dinner session. Thank you for joining us, and please join me in putting your hands together for next time.